The world of Talaran is no stranger to war and other such conflicts, both large-scale and small. While the scholars and bards like to paint things in shades of purely black and white, good and evil, right and wrong, it is rarely so simple. Dictatorships that brought industry and infrastructure have been overthrown by well-meaning adventurers, only to see the country slide into decline, since adventurers rarely make good heads of state. Not to mention the vast number of conflicts, where neither side is truly evil. Though the Kasurians will always insist that they represent good and the Francomanians evil, it's hardly the actual case. But sometimes the actions of a small group of people can avert a war, no matter how justified or unjust. Should another magic academy have formed in Heluria in time, conflict between them and Orbitus would have been all but inevitable. While knowledge itself is not a thing that can be mined out of the dirt, it still causes much envy and conflict in various ways. The Helurians would have eventually wanted more, and their academy would have been backed by an army, while Orbitus was purposefully apart from any greater nation. And if two such forces had gone to war, there's no telling how disastrous it could have been, for if anyone knows how to wage war, it's academics. So instead, something had to be done before it became a problem, and while in the long run the destruction of the library no doubt saved lives and was an act of good, many consider it to be one of the most evil and malicious acts of any era. Over the centuries, scholars and normal people would argue about how the fire robbed the Helurians of a second elven golden age of sorts, or that the loss of knowledge and history would hold back the advancement of Talaran by centuries. But while many speak of the event itself, very, very few know of what really happened. But that's by design, considering the truth is hard to make black and white. To really understand why it happened, however, it is important to understand the events leading up to this critical point in history by observing the perpetrators plan their attack. Which is why we must look into the life of Thunder Sparkle the Unicorn. The glade was bathed in the romantic moonlight, as the majestic creature saw the girl sitting beside the pond singing a soft song. Her dress was surprisingly immodest for the cool night air, but such was simply how things worked in romantic moonlit glades next to ponds. The unicorn slowly approached, pausing as the girl looked his way. She gasped out and stood up then as he resumed trotting toward her. He could sense her nervousness as he approached, so he slowed down once more, shaking his head to lead his chromatic mane flare in the moonlight and catch the rays to light up. As the girl gasped at the majestic splendor of it, the unicorn smirked a little and drew in closer. He made sure to let out a whinny and to stop and pose in the middle of the glade, to really let the rays of moonlight frame him there, looking as impressive as possible, his horn gleaming as it subtly changed colors. As she let out a soft gasp, he knew that he had her. Girls loved horses, and magic horses were even better, not to mention the nice atmosphere of the glade. Figuring she was ready for him to get close, he carefully walked near, as if he was also nervous despite being a seasoned pro at this sort of thing. Once he was close enough for her to touch him, he could see she was still rather nervous, and while she had a hand up as if to reach out for him, she hadn't touched him yet. He leaned in, then rubbing his muzzle against her hand, down her arm, and then bumped it up against her chest, which was when she suddenly gripped his mane, and he heard someone jump from the bushes nearby. "Stop right there, criminal scum!" "Huh?" Thunder Sparkle tried to lift his head up, but the girl's grip just grew stronger as she suddenly shimmered and turned into a giant armored werewolf. "You've got the wrong guy!" he cried out then, as he saw a demon step out besides the human who'd jumped out first. "Ah! You're here to kill me and steal my blood!" He got ready to jump away, only to find his hooves chained to the ground by ethereal bonds. "You aren't going anywhere, sicko!" the human growled out as he approached. "We're with the Orbitus Patrol of Lawful Incredible Creature Enforcement, and you're going to jail for what you were about to do, mister." "What? You can't be from Orbitus! You're human!" the unicorn exclaimed. "You're evil blood thieves! If we wanted your blood, you'd be dead. I happen to be Steve, one of the first human mages, and I'm here to take down sick perverts like you," the human growled out. No, you've got it all wrong. I was just going to let her ride on my back through the night and take her on a magical adventure. You've got the wrong idea. The unicorn insisted then, as Steve just shook his head. Which has nothing to do with why you approached a virgin in the middle of the night, does it? She's only 9, you sicko. As Steve said that, the werewolf growled out angrily in the unicorn's face. What? She looked like an adult to me, I swear! Thundersparkle was beginning to sweat. Was the werewolf a 9-year-old? She'd looked older, or that you've got the ingredients for a level 4 persuasion spell in your mane. The human reached out to drag the little pouch out of where it was hidden in the unicorn's flowing mane. No, that's just for other stuff later. I'm telling you that you've got it all wrong. Steve just nodded and tugged another pouch from that flowing mane. And the level 3 sleep spell? He asked, but Thundersparkle shook his head as much as he could with the werewolf girl gripping it. You planted that. That isn't mine. I want to speak to my legal counsel. But the human just shook his head. Oh, likely story. We've got you dead to rights, you pervert. I'm talking hard time in the equestrian planes of confinement. The unicorn gasped at that. No, you can't. Do you have any idea what those centaurs would do to a pretty boy like me? He tugged at the bonds once more but was held fast by the magic. Oh, I'm aware, all right, that you'll get exactly what you deserve. Those degenerates will be lining up for a turn. The human began to tuck away the evidence as he nodded to the demon. Right. Read him his rights and we'll get him before the judge in the morning, and tomorrow he'll get to become familiar with his new friends. No, wait! Wait! No need to be so hasty. We can make a deal, Thundersparkle insisted. You're from Orbitus, right? I'm Lord Thundersparkle from Hiluria. The Grand Library is trying to acquire rare artifacts and stuff from Orbitus. They're planning on stealing from you guys. I can prove it. Oh, a likely story, Fartsparkle. The human snorted as he crossed his arms, but to the unicorn's surprise, the werewolf giggled like a little girl. We'd need a hell of a lot of proof to even think about simply sending you to the county stable for bad magical horses for a lesser sentence. I swear, take me back to Arbitus. Put me under a truth field. I swear I'll tell you everything. Magical passwords, where to get artifacts, the layout of the library, everything. Just don't lock me up with the centaurs. He whinnied out as Steve stroked his goatee for a moment and then wagged a finger at the unicorn. We'll see. You better have good intel or I'm going to make sure you do some seriously hard time for your shenanigans tonight, Thunderbutt. Once more the werewolf giggled out, but Thundersparkle just nodded. Yes, I swear. I'll tell you everything. After a moment, the human finally nodded. All right. Officer Sherry, take him away to the processing center, Steve said. Right you are. All right. Come along nice and easy or I'll get my whip out. And I assure you it won't be as nice as it sounds, pervert. The demon growled and stepped forward, clamping a ring of magic nullification around the unicorn's horn before activating her own rune of teleportation to take her back to Orbitus with the unicorn. That went pretty well. Steve grinned once the unicorn was gone. Fartsparkle. Fenrina giggled once more before looking over at Steve. But hey, what did that bit about being a virgin mean? I don't really understand what he wanted to do. Steve blinked as he looked at the werehusky. It's a magic thing. See, me and Sherry and Larry, we're all older magic users and all that, so sometimes we talk about magic stuff that's all complicated and confusing. So don't worry about it. We'll explain it to you once you're older. So if I ever tell you it's a magic thing, don't worry about it. He laughed nervously then, as the werehusky considered this and shrugged. So, is he a bad horse? I know you want him to help us, and I don't really get what he was going to do, but you made it sound like he's a bad horse. So, he is still going to get punished, right? She asked, always concerned that bad people got punished. Yes, he'll spend some time in the stable for bad magical horses, and I'll make sure to do something even worse. Tell his wife. Steve chuckled, but then stopped as Fenrina looked at him blankly, obviously not understanding it. Magic thing? Okay, so what's the acronym for that thing you said we were a part of? Steve arched a brow as she asked that. What? Oh, you mean the patrol? Nothing. POLICE doesn't spell anything. He'd been starting to teach her and Astrid to read and write, but it was slow going since they were busy. Police? She sounded out. If it doesn't mean anything, then why did you use it? She tilted her head as she asked him that. It's a real thing, actually. Orbitas keeps magical, supposedly lawful creatures in check. But this is what I'm talking about. If it was actually a cool acronym, we could shout that out. Instead, I have to say each word because who would really worry about an organization with that name anyway? Freeze, it's the Police. He shrugged and then shook his head. See, not very menacing. I guess. So, are we really going to steal stuff from that library? She asked. You heard, Fart Sparkle? He waited for Fenrina to giggle again before continuing. Sometimes it was fun having a giant kid as their tank. They were going to steal from us, so we have to beat them to it. I figure that if we get enough, it'll be what the Archdean wants anyway. But I'm going to make it clear to you and everyone else. Under no circumstances are we going to doom burns down a library. Steve was just stepping out of the holding stable for the various criminal equines that were being stored in Orbitas, awaiting trial, going over his notes. Thundersparkle had given him some good intel indeed. Seemed like the elves were preparing to step up their tactics in getting more artifacts and tomes from Orbitas and beyond. It seemed like he was getting a chance to do something good. If he could clear out their library first, he might be able to expose their plot and keep things focused on their crimes, and not his own which were about to happen. He had a plan already in motion. With Thundersparkle's information, he'd figured out a way into the library so they could rob them blind. With their plans to gather more artifacts from around Talaron, the Halurians had been hiring adventuring parties to gather some of the more far-flung treasures, or at least the ones that didn't require a more subtle touch like those belonging to Orbitas and other institutes. Steve was planning on using Thundersparkle's sigil to get them into the library, and from there they'd make their way to the artifact vault, and rob them blind with the help of a modified bag of holding the Archdean had given them to use. The only big problem was getting a disguise for Sherry and Fenrina, or possibly Astrid. The wards around the library would make it nearly impossible for magical disguises to pass through. Technically, Weiss's amulet of illusion would do the trick, but he was using that to prank those crap bastards. Maybe Sherry had ideas? He ducked into the small storage room that the Archdean had let them turn into a planning room where the other three were. He was just in time to catch the tail end of their conversation. But what makes centaurs evil? Fenrina was asking Sherry. Well, please, honey, you give a guy a third leg literally size of a horse, and only enough smarts to run one head at a time. If even that, you know what's going to happen, don't you? Sherry snorted as Fenrina just blinked in confusion. But don't they have 4 legs? I thought they were horse people, she asked as Steve laughed loudly in an attempt to end the conversation quickly. Ha! It's just a magic thing, Fenrina, don't worry about it. We'll explain it all later. He was glad he'd come up with that excuse for so many things they spoke about around her. So I've got pretty much everything we need, except how to disguise you two. He pointed at Fenrina and Sherry. Why does she need a disguise? Sherry asked as she nodded at Fenrina. No one knows who she is. Yes, but that's not the point. They'll let humans and dwarves in, but a demon and a werewolf? Not a chance. He held up a hand then as both girls were about to speak. I know you're a half-demon and a werehusky, but they won't listen to us and you know it. I was hoping you might have some ideas on how to spoof their wards. He continued then, looking at Sherry, but to his surprise, it was Larry who spoke up. It's pretty simple. We turn them to stone. The others looked at the dwarf in surprise, but Steve nodded as he caught on. We make them into the artifacts we're returning? That's brilliant. They'll detect magic, but just assume it's to do with them being artifacts. He nodded as he tapped his chin, thinking about the best way to do that without harming the girls. But will getting stoned hurt? Fenrina asked, and Steve had to hold back a laugh. It should be fine. We can make it a temporary stone form as opposed to complete petrification. He walked over to the map they had made of the library and the area around the vault. However, they might put them in the secondary vault here, which is larger but has more statues. He tapped his chin. We need some sort of secondary artifacts or relics to attach to them to make sure they only get put in the main vault with the other stuff, not to mention a way to get them there. We can't really hire a team of laborers. Don't worry, I got that part covered. Once we get to the city, I'll just need 3 bananas, 4 cherries, and as much whipped cream as you can make me. Steve frowned as the dwarf told him that, and he wondered if it was some sort of riddle, but he just shrugged. Okay, well, we still need some artifacts to attach to them. He began to go over the list in his hand and tapped on an entry. Here, we'll say that we got something from the vault of King Kamehumana from the Wild Islands. No one has ever actually gotten into the vaults, so no one will know what's in there. That is not his name, Sherry said then as Steve looked over at her. What? Kamehumana? Yes, it is. He handed her the list then as she read over it briefly. What kind of name is that? She asked with a shake of her head. Ancient tropical elf or something, or like, maybe they were the half-elf, half-mer people? He shrugged. I forget. He was some crazy bastard who lived in a volcano. Got his people killed over some stupid greed. That's not important. What is important is that we get some sort artifacts. He tapped his chin, trying to think of the best way to get them when he snapped his fingers. Right, I'll get the artifacts. Sherry, prepare a disguise for you and Fenrina for our trip to the city. Larry, prepare the stone form spell and practice until you're positive they won't have a piece of their body chipped off. I'll be back, but I need to make a stop in the kitchen first. It's an Almarin dish. Well, my take on one of our classics at least. It's a Dyer burger made from Dairy cow, and aged cheddar also made from the milk of the same Dairy cow, topped with bacon from a Dyer boar, pickled onions. The bun is made from hell wheat and heaven barely toasted and buttered in the fashion of extra thick toast. For a side, the rare but tasty ghost taters cut into slices and then fried in 3 different types of fat. Of course, I made an extra large serving for you since I know you like this sort of food. Steve looked at Duskmaw as he figured she was going to need to at least cut the massive 4-pound burger into much smaller pieces to eat it. Not to mention the giant mound of potatoes he'd fried up for her. The creature in the body of an elf nodded slowly as she licked her lips while examining the meal before her. He'd used a time speed spell to try and observe her when she slowed time to eat the food. But even then she moved in a blur, meaning her magic was significantly stronger than his. Steve saw her head seem to grow 4 times its size, and her teeth looked razor-sharp as she chomped down on the burger in several big bites before stuffing her face with the fries. Before he could really react, she was back to her elf form, dabbing at her lips with a napkin before letting out one of the largest belches he'd ever heard. "Just what the fuck are you?" he gasped out, then realizing the time effects had ended. A gentleman never asks, and a lady never tells. She responded while continuing to dab at her lips with the napkin for another moment. Delicious, as always. "Look, I'm not a gentleman and you're not a lady, so get talking." He set his hands on his hips, but she just ignored that and gave him a look. "What artifacts do you need this time?" He stared at her for several seconds before sighing heavily, still wondering just what in the hell she was. "Anything, really. Just something rare and or powerful. I'm passing off some stuff as being from King Kamehumana's vault." "Oh," she perked up a little. "I have some stuff from his kingdom, actually." "You do?" Steve asked, a little surprised. "Oh yes, it was quite fun out there before he went mad and the volcano eruptions got more constant. Rare or powerful, right? I'll be back." She got up then, and he watched her walk into a massive painting of herself that took up most of one of her walls in the dining room here in her quarters. The painting shimmered as she simply walked through it, and then returned a few seconds later with a rather gorgeous-looking giant gold and ruby necklace that was inlaid with some other materials he wasn't familiar with. The thing looked very heavy, yet impressive. "This one is rather nice. It's inlaid with volcanic spirits and the gemstones that both protect you from virtually all forms of fire, and as well as the ability to set things on fire too. Should work nicely. And now this one you have to promise to be very careful with, and I expect it back. You don't need to worry yourself over what it does, just know that you better damn well keep it safe." Steve would have asked questions about the second artifact, but he was busy blinking as he looked at the giant gem-encrusted golden. "Cock! What in the hell, Steve?" Sherry was glaring at him as she set her hands on her hips. The wooden box Duskmaw had given him for the fertility totem between them on the table. "This is what we have to work with. I can't give it to Fenrina. It would make her ask way too many questions, he replied, waving his hands around a little. These are actual artifacts from the right place. If they have any experts on hand, we need to use these too. So Fenrina gets the necklace and you get the fertility relic. Do you even know what it does? She asked. I have no idea, he confessed. She wouldn't tell me, and I just wanted to get out of there before I asked anything I was unprepared to find out about. He shrugged. Look, it's gotta be you. I mean, do you even need to scry this thing? You can basically feel the magic just radiating off of it. It's crazy powerful. When he mentioned that Sherry did look back down into the box, the gold rays reflecting off her face. You do have a point there, and she wouldn't tell you what it does? Steve made a face for a moment before shrugging. To be perfectly honest, I didn't pry all that much. She gave me a giant gold cock in a box and told me not to ask questions. I'm normally the curious sort, but I just sort of blanked and shut the box and walked away. As he finished saying that, he tossed his hands up in the air and shrugged again. And just how do you expect me to get this into the vault? She asked, glaring at him as he thought it over for a moment, but as he went to say something, she raised a finger. If you say what I think you're about to say, I'm going to make you regret it. He froze then, but slowly continued since he couldn't think of anything else. Strap on? He flinched a little, expecting some sort of reprisal, but Sherry actually just blinked. Oh, that could work, I guess. So you turn me to stone and then strap it on? Steve nodded and she rubbed her chin. Fine, but you owe me big for this. Back rubs, foot rubs, whatever you want, sweetie, he promised. Now, did you get Fenrina disguised as a human? Yeah, she's just next door getting used to a hairless body, she mentioned and reached out to slam the box shut with such ferocity that Steve jumped back a bit. Back rubs and foot rubs. Promise. He nodded as she picked up the box to carry it next door to their little planning room. Fenrina had been transformed into a large, blonde, barbarian-looking woman, though her armor, sword, and shield all looked the same. She was also petting her herself. As they watched, she was stroking her left arm with her right and seemed to be utterly fascinated. Do you guys always feel like this? She asked them, and Steve nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess. You've felt us before. He frowned a little. Yeah, but, different. Steve looked to Sherry, who just shrugged, so he pressed on. Right. And where's Larry? Right behind you, cool cat, the dwarf mentioned as he stepped into the room behind them. I've got things all worked out. We'll stop by my sweet thing's estate at the edge of the city, and I'll convince her to lend us her levitation stones, which can use to get the girls into the library as statues. We're all good, baby. Yeah, speaking of why do you need the bananas and whipped cream? Steve asked, then since he was still confused about that. It's part of my way of apologizing to her. You see, she caught me sleeping with her sister, Larry said as Steve just shook his head. Well, I'm sure. And then her daughter. And then her mother. Steve just looked at the dwarf, unsure how he should feel about that. Impressed? Dumbfounded? Both? At the same time? He finally asked. Oh no, when you're with a lady like that, you gotta lay her down real smooth by the fire as you make it clear that she's the only woman on the planet for you. You gotta look deep into her soul and… Okay, I get it, Steve interrupted as he heard that strange, soothing music start to play for a moment before he stopped Larry from going on. I don't, Fenrina said then. What's the fruit for? How's that part of an apology? It's fruit-based magic, Steve said as he sighed and rubbed his face, wondering how long he could keep this up. He'd thought it was such a clever workaround, but between Sherry and Larry, he just couldn't win. Are cherries fruit? Fenrina asked then, and that caught Steve by surprise a little as he opened his mouth and then shut it before frowning and then looking confused. I don't know. Berries? Food-based magic, not just fruit. Food-based. He corrected himself then. And what about the sleeping together thing? Why would people be upset about that? I mean, back home everyone slept together all the time. Big groups of us usually. Me and Astrid plenty too. The three other members of Doom blinked as they stared at Fenrina. I mean, it's way too cold in the frozen plains to not huddle for warmth. Me and the other sled dogs would sleep in a big pile all the time. Right, Steve said as it clicked for him. Yes, but, elves are weird, and it's not very cold where they are, so they pick who they want to sleep with 'cause they don't want to get too hot. And Larry here probably promised each of them he'd sleep with them, but obviously he can't be in 4 places at once. And since it would be too hot for everyone to sleep together, the others would be annoyed he picked someone else. Steve stared at the were-husky-turned-human who thought that over for a bit, and nodded. Oh, I guess that makes sense. I do miss sleeping with people even if it's pretty warm here compared to back home. I have to hug like 3 pillows to make up for it. Maybe I could sleep with one of you 3 then? She looked at the others, and Larry was opening his mouth before Sherry just slapped the dwarf upside the head without even looking at him. You can sleep with my then when you want, dear. Larry's the wrong size for you, and Steve is a sleep kicker, but I'm perfect, I promise. Fenrina smiled at them happily as Larry looked at Steve. Sleep kicker? The dwarf asked as he rubbed his face where Sherry had slapped him. Yeah, sorta. I move a lot in my sleep. Kicking happens sometimes. He shrugged. I couldn't tell you why. The first time it happened, I thought he was angry I stole the sheets, Sherry mentioned as Steve snorted. We were in hell. One of the hells anyway. There was no need for sheets in the first place. But it sure was a shock to wake up getting stabbed. It was just a fork, Sherry countered as Steve waved his hands. Why did you even have it? You know what, never mind. This isn't helpful. Okay, we all know the plan. Get to Halluridin, Larry gets us the levitation platforms, you 2 pose, we turn you into statues, decorate you in the artifacts. Oh, speaking of what's mine? Fenrina asked, derailing Steve's speech. It's a necklace that makes you immune to fire and also might cause a fire, so be careful with it. He pulled the giant necklace from the case Duskmaw had given it to him in. Ooh, pretty. Steve's perception of Fenrina was so strange considering she was 2, but as a husky, that's an adult. But also she was a were-husky. But now currently in the body of a 6'6" Amazonian northern barbarian with blonde hair, though her eyes were still mismatched. But at least she still liked the pretty necklace. Yes, very. Anyway, we get you into the vault, turn you back into normal, and depending on how me and Larry do with the sleep powder and the guards either fight off the guards while we stuff the vault contents into the sack of holding I've got or do it more sneakily if no one is the wiser. Then again, depending, fight our way out or just walk out. And we don't burn the place down, right? They nodded as he looked around. Any questions? He waited, but no one spoke up. Larry, you've got the sleep powder? Ooh, yee. Then, I guess we're ready? He felt like something was missing. We need to have some sort of chant or thing we do, Fenrina chimed in then. Like, go Team Doom. She jumped a little. Sherry rubbed her chin and looked at the other 2. Steve thought it over and shrugged while Larry stuck his hand out with 3 of his fingers splayed out in a sort of W shape. M for misfits, he explained, and Steve nodded slowly. Fenrina giggled and happily stuck her fingers out as well before Sherry and Steve followed along then, all 4 of them pressing their fingers into the middle before they all spoke together. Go Team Doom! After a moment they looked around the room as the light from the candles came back and the thunder faded away. Why does that keep happening? Fenrina asked as she looked around. I gave up trying to figure it out a few days ago. Steve confessed. Right. Now let's get to work.